Welcome back, Red Spotters. Another show here on the Red Spotlight Entertainment Podcast. I'm your host today, Alexis J. Soto, joined by Alexis Moreno. And we're back with our second installment of our four-part segment series, recapping the events of The Crown, which is currently streaming on Netflix. Last time both of us were on, we, of course, recapped Season 1, and that was fun. I think that kind of rhymed. I hope it did anyway. And well, today, of course, we're here to talk about Season 2, or as the Brits say, Series 2. Although it's not necessarily well, I guess it is British television, although it is mainly for Americans. I guess, I mean...
Yeah.
with Netflix and everything.
I heard that like they really like it over there, or they find it interesting over there too.
It's interesting, right? Different cultures, especially considering that this is heavily based on their country and their history. It is fascinating, I guess, to hear what they think of it.
Yeah.
And everything. It's like with many aspects of the show that we talk about, The Crown, fascinating on really interesting levels, if that even made sense. And I think it did. Hopefully it did. So how are you doing, Alexis? You ready to get into Season 2?
Yes, I'm very excited. This is my favorite season. So
It's really good. It's like the show. I'll get into the synopsis of the season, what happens and everything, but like, off the top, and I'm not sure if this was established last time, but the show has a pretty amazing consistency and quality throughout the four series. There are, of course, I mean, with every show, there are some better than others, but I think like I haven't really thought about, which ones are my favorites, because I think they're all really, really good.
yeah.
So I guess that's a question to ask myself by the time we get to the end of covering The Crown. But at least for me, on the surface of it, it was all really good because I kept watching and watching and watching. So I think that has to tell you something.
Yeah. I think that's something. Like, I don't know, every episode, like, something different happens, even though it's kind of all, like, each season is trying to tell you something, but through different times and different, like, I wouldn't say eras, I don't know how to explain, like, different events.
Right.
But you just, like, you can't stop watching it because you're just like, wait, like, what's gonna happen next? I know. And forgive us if we keep harping on this, but I think one of the most prized feathers in their cap, as they say, for the show is it's just made for this age of television in many ways. But the fact that it is very addicting and very bingeable definitely fits the age that we're in right now, with the age of streaming. Yeah, I agree.
And like, I don't think I ever watched just one episode and then stopped. Like, I don't think that's in my DNA.
No. I watched like the whole thing all the way through. I couldn't. I had to like not do anything or prepare to not do anything for a long period of time.
Yeah. So, and the number of storylines with season 2, the main storylines with season 2 become, I think, more thematic and more centralized. In particular with the big characters, the big 3, the big 2, however you want to call them. But it gets pretty freaking dramatic real quick. So let me talk about what they have here as the synopsis for The Crown Season 2. Season 2 covers the period between 1956 and 1964. Claire Foy continues to portray the Queen, and the season covers the Suez Crisis in 1956, the retirement of the Queen's third Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, in 1963, following the Profumo affair political scandal, and the births of Prince Andrew in 1960 and Prince Edward in 1964. That's a general idea of the time that we're in with this era of the crown, but the main storylines that we see throughout this season, the main one clearly is the relationship between Elizabeth and Philip, and then of course we have Margaret and a new romance that she has this season. There are, of course, so many supporting characters that have their moments here in and here out, and we'll get to them. We'll get to them. I know there's one in particular we want to get to. But overall, that if the season belongs to anybody, I mean, this is Elizabeth's show, as we keep saying, but like Elizabeth and Philip definitely have a lot of the focus in this season. And so like, do we want to just straight up talk about that first, or do you want to bring in some other smaller things before we get to that?
No, I think we can go off from there, because I think that's kind of how we did it last time, like each big story or relationship, anything like that. So I think we can start off with that one.
Well, it's like, going into this, it's basically picking up from a cliffhanger from season 1, because what was remarkably left unresolved, at least I remember thinking to myself, watching the season 1 finale, thinking, wait, we're not going to get a resolution to this relationship crumbling before our eyes? And then, of course, season 2, okay, well, season 2 is basically the follow-up and resolution, if you want to put it that way, to events, to what we've experienced, what we've exposed the relationship, to be. And it manages to, right off the bat, literally start with that and kind of take it a couple of notches up than what it was in the season finale, because it and I think they do this to great effect, starting off the season with a cold open, a conversation that Philip and Elizabeth have, that we're not technically going to see for a couple of months, a couple of episodes, I think, in fact, but they're giving us basically it almost felt like it is like a cold open. I mean, that is what it is. But like, if we were talking about trailers, it would be basically a teaser trailer, a full scene of these two being as mad as they ever have with each other, and at one moment you think and it's an amazing scene. These two are incredible.
Oh, they're so good.
We can praise the performances all day and all night, but these two are, I mean, I can't find a word for it other than amazing. They're just stunning. And so
I love, like, one thing that they do is that the dynamic that they have with each other, like, where Elizabeth always, at least, like, on screen, at least, she seems very, like, innocent and very, like, like, she holds back a lot, whereas Philip is more condescending towards her and, like, pushes down on her.
Passive-aggressive.
Yeah, but that he can't do much because she's the queen, and like, she always has, like, I don't know, she always is kind of what you have to listen to, and she knows that too, but she doesn't want to obviously say it. I don't know. I love how they play off with each other in that sense.
Oh my god, yeah. And it was So we see that conversation twice at the beginning, and then of course in a couple episodes from there. But you're immediately just brought back in to the show, and you're basically being told, all right, here's where we're gonna, get into the crux that is the relationship. And I guess like let's talk about the first 3 episodes. I think that's mainly with them, because what really begins the season is Philip being unhappy. And I mean, obviously we talked about how unhappy he was toward the end of last season.
Yeah.
And I think Elizabeth's mom, the Queen Mother, I want to say it was at the end of last season that she suggested that Elizabeth, that's what happened, right? Like at the end of season 1, she suggested to Elizabeth that she send Philip away. That sounds bad. I mean, send him away, but
yeah.
It is basically what it is, but like at the same time, to give him something meaningful, to give him a project, an assignment that means, a lot to the institution of the crown. And she asked him, and he was predictably not very pleased with having to do that request. That happened at the very end of last season, and so for the first, I want to say 3 episodes of season 2, we see Philip he leaves, and we see some things that happen there, which we'll get to. But he basically is away. He's at sea. He's seeing the world pretty much. It's hilarious that how much of this feels like an exile of sorts. Although like he's there as an official capacity. And I forget that. I forget, like, they do, like, it feels like it's a big vacation almost. Yeah. Like, to get away from the fucking marriage.
He's, like, grounded, basically.
He is, although...
In their eye.
You don't get the... Not from his perspective. I think it you get the impression that while he's on... this expedition of sorts, he's having the time of his life. He's having more fun than he ever did in the whole show, just being out there. And he has one friend, one companion in particular that is quite problematic, shall we say. And that doesn't necessarily end well, but you see along the way the influence this problematic person, this kind of an asshole, really, was what he is. I mean, he left his fucking family, just dumped them off just to go on a trip with the prince here, which, I mean, I guess if you're that kind of person, that appeals to you, whatever. But you see the kind of crowd they attract, the fact that both of them found a gentleman's club with a certain reputation that's not desirable, especially if you're connected to the queen, especially like that,
especially if you're married to her.
Exactly. And then on top of all of this, you see their excursions while they're out there in the world, and they help themselves to a fair share of, I don't know if I want to say indecencies, but it ain't necessarily great what they're doing sometimes. So I guess that's up to your interpretation. So we see a lot of that with Philip, and I really want to know, like, because there's a lot of ways we can start off with this. So we don't want to get lost with the friend yet, but I guess the first thing I can say is part of me felt good for him, and another part of me felt you really need to be more careful with the things that you're involving yourself with and the people who you're surrounding yourself with, because this isn't gonna look good for you. At the same time, what I thought was really one of the more powerful moments was some of the stuff that ended up coming back to Buckingham Palace. So one of my favorite parts of it was when they basically would send these films, like home movies that he would make he sent them back to Elizabeth, and then they would screen them for the family. And that was nice.
Yeah.
I really thought that kind of marked somewhat of a tonal shift for him, and maybe some indication that he had grown just a tad bit, was that Christmas Day speech he gave while he was, I think, literally overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think it was, I don't know if it was Margaret or the Queen Mother that pointed this out while they were listening to it, but they were saying, is that really Philip? Like, how different he sounded. So, like, you get the sense, and especially how cinematic in scope this show is. It's really beautiful, and you get a lot of these wonderful big locations. You feel the distance between Elizabeth and Philip, and at that moment, like, I felt conflicted because it almost felt like, from Philip's perspective, there's a lot to get to Elizabeth, but from Philip's perspective, you get the sense that maybe this did some good, at least for him. But then you felt really cold about, in that moment, kind of crystallized how Elizabeth and Philip have kind of really just this rift between them. And maybe the trip didn't do that relationship many favors.
Mm-hmm. I did feel that way. And like, I felt mainly bad. Like, I did feel good. You know, he was having a good time after, you know, having a shitty time.
That was season 1, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I felt like he had kind of this weight lifted off his shoulders, or like this, like, feeling of just, like, not doing anything, you know? But, yeah, I think that, like, it's kind of like you get into like a big fight and then you go away and you kind of have that realization of like, well, maybe this isn't what I wanted actually. And that's kind of how I felt that they saw that. But then at the same time, I don't know, like, you don't get that with like Elizabeth, which sucks. 'Cause, you know, like, I don't know, like, I always did think, you know, that they truly do love each other. It's just the situation that they're in doesn't help them.
It doesn't help them at all. I mean, and in fact, look, I don't even think any of these problems between in their marriage would exist between them if it, of course, wasn't for the crown. And the show clearly presents it as that really is the root of all of the problems that are happening. That isn't to say, of course, that the relationship was perfect. Of course, we can't speak to that because the show didn't show us that part before the whole thing started. They showed us glimpses of that trip they had. And that was fun. They seemed perfectly happy. But clearly, this is what the show had been building to for a whole season at this point, is just Philip on the edge of, you know, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Like, this is just, even though it is what I signed up for, technically speaking, this isn't what I really thought I was signing up for in that regard. So this is the thing with the Crown, what they do with a lot of their characters, Elizabeth and Philip included. They do a really good job of making you sympathize with them as human beings. At the same time, they don't necessarily sugarcoat a lot of the really shady things they do. And I mean every character. I don't think any character in the entire show is above scrutiny or any kind of criticism at all. Like, there's so many things that which I think, you know, to an extent is actually pretty smart, because that's people. That's human nature. That's, you know, that's who they are. Like, no, and it's in some ways it is refreshing to see these people who, regardless of whether or not you come to a decision of whether they're good people or not, they give you
reasons to like them and reasons to not like them. Right, basically. And hey, every human being is complicated and has, you know, I think it was
one particular line of dialogue by Matt Smith, in fact, when he was on Doctor Who. He was talking about, there was this episode they did with Vincent Van Gogh, or Van Gogh, as it's pronounced here. And they're talking about how, Van Gogh, which I hope people listening know who that person is. Dear God, I mean, please. I mean, people forget what Auschwitz was. So, I mean,
or I can't don't believe in it.
I can't really be sure about that anymore. But the point is, and I don't recall it verbatim, but the point of it was, every life is a collection of good things and bad things. And he said something about the fact that, the good things don't necessarily, erase the bad, but the bad things don't make the good things not matter at all.
Go away, yeah.
Like yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's look, every person that ever existed has a list of good things and bad things listed next to their name. And with these characters in particular, they do a good job of getting me on their side. Until, of course, you take into account some of other actions that they partake in that are not, helping the situation anymore. Like, I really want to be on Philip's side. Mm-hmm. But he really has a big fucking ego on him where, like, it prevents him sometimes from realizing anyone else's point of view or position. And so, like, I got the impression, and very clearly this is what the purpose of this was. Elizabeth was trying to help her husband here. She was trying to give his life some semblance of meaning and purpose. She was trying to make him feel important, which is what he's been screaming at to the whole world for a whole year. And I feel like his ego and his just attitude problem that he's got keeps him from being able to see the good that she's trying to do for him, which inadvertently leads to, and this is a reoccurring issue with them, unfortunately for them, and as it was, in real life, and a big part of the season, which leads to a big explosion, confrontation, is it leads to these constant rumors of infidelity.
Mm-hmm. I feel like he pushes the limit that his relationship can handle too far sometimes. And yes, there are those rumors, which I don't know, I feel like I do believe them because I feel like they just had too many problems and things got too difficult sometimes. And he, at least from what I see on the show, he could be different in real life, but from what I see on the show, it feels like he would do something like that. Especially, like, and like, it's not an excuse, but like, for the times that they were living in, being like kind of this male provider person was a big deal then. Mm-hmm. And him not getting that, he's going to go look for it somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you 100%. I understand the sentiment entirely in that situation. At the same time, I do find myself still a little unsure about what exactly did he do, right? Because one of the big moments in the first episode was, entirely, I think, without dialogue, but really powerful, was when Elizabeth was basically sneaking in a little present in his briefcase, in his luggage, as he was about to leave. Mm-hmm. And she finds a photo of a ballerina.
Mm-hmm.
And she looks at it and she's horrified about what that could mean. And that is something that she remarkably keeps to herself for a pretty long time, long after this initial scuffle is resolved. And it was, I think, one of the first moments where, I think maybe the first moment where she begins to question, okay, what the fuck's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't good. And then, but she also, you do feel for her, and as you would feel for any person, really, who would begin to realize perhaps their marriage is at that bad of a level. And I think she puts also in the briefcase a note of always remember you have a family. Which, in retrospect, wasn't very subtle, was it? I really wanted to know what Philip thought of that. Like, what the fuck? Where did this come from?
That was so good. She might have said a bitch at the end. It's, I don't know. I love her. Oh.
Damn. Oh, boy.
These little, like, comebacks that she has, they're so good. Like, and they're not even comebacks, it's just, like, her talking. But yeah, I don't know. I love that moment. It's so good. But yeah, I mean, yes, she did keep that to herself for a really long time. But I think that she also just kind of, like, obviously she doesn't feel good about it. Like, you know, who would? Especially because I do truly think that, you know, she was, like, in it, you know? Like, and she also couldn't see past, like, you know, like, this is just how it is. This is how it has to be, you know? Like, she couldn't take that away from her thinking, which she shouldn't, you know, like, but, I don't know, she kept that quite shut for too long, I think.
Well, I think she found a more appropriate time to play that card later on, when we'll get to that moment. But that is really the central thing with Elizabeth, is how much she allows herself, and arguably speaking, how much she has no choice but to really subverse her identity and who she was behind, not even behind a wall, just erase it almost completely, to where the only identity and personality that she can have is this nobility, the crown, this, you know, otherworldly being that, you know, stands for this institution. And the byproduct of that is it leads her to make decisions that, while always correct for the point of view of protecting the institution, at the same time always end up being perceived, and in reality really are, cold, heartless, and cruel.
Yeah.
Which we've explored, like, from last season with Margaret and her decision about, you know, not letting her marry Peter Townsend.
And it's also like, I don't know, I just feel like she felt even more pressure because this wasn't something that she wasn't going to do. Or at least not for a really long time. And the fact that she got it so suddenly and so out of the blue, her mentality had to switch, like, overnight. And so I think that's why she can't get away from that. Just like, oh, this is how it is now. Like, everybody else has to, like, work with me type of thing. And she realizes, like, no, nobody wants to do that, I think. So yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, you see that she does love Philip, because there are moments where that scene that I mentioned about them looking at the film, and there's close-ups to her, and she just looks so sad, lonely.
Yeah.
You know, she wants him there, and she's also longing for him. In that way. Now, Elizabeth is a very complicated figure, and she's not, I think, actively a heartless person, but she makes numerous heartless decisions, really. And I think in this, well, of course, I guess you could construe this decision to, like, send him away as one. Clearly we've already discussed that wasn't necessarily the intention on her part, but yeah. And you're talking about earlier how she's kind of a bad bitch. I mean, I think she literally showed up to that particular ballerina's performance when she was around town.
Yeah.
Like, okay, all right, I see what you're doing here. Yeah, it doesn't, and it's one of the other big, I would say, dynamics. I mean, it's the same dynamic. Like, their relationship, what they don't, I think she even mentions this at the top of episode 1. They don't have the option of divorce. I mean, they kind of do, but they don't. I mean, Charles and Diana, we'll get to when we get to, and there's a lot to get to that in seasons down the road, but they were fortunate to live in the era than they did. If I would, I can't be sure if divorce. I would hope it was a mutual decision for them to get the fuck away from each other at some point. I mean, you'd think, right, that there'd be some agreement at least in separation, but you can't be sure about that. So I'm just putting that to the side. The Crown, as we've established, is the very reason for why this couple, Elizabeth and Philip, are having the problems that they're having. But what is also unique to them is that they don't have the option to ever leave each other until death do us part.
And honestly, even if they did have that option, I don't think that they would.
Yeah, huh? That is interesting too.
Because I truly do believe that they cared about each other and loved each other. It's just they had a lot of issues. And, like, hard issues. So that's, I don't know.
I think what's interesting is
to think about.
It is, but it's also, I think, a good contrast looking back after seeing season 4. I'm not going to get into season 4, but just the relationship that I just mentioned from season 4, when you contrast the issues that they had with the issues that this couple has. Yeah. They're stark in the sense that one relationship they both have more or less the same number of issues, not the exact same issues, but the same laundry list of issues that you could say. But with one, there is a way to make it work. And a desire on the parties of both of the people in the relationship to want to make it work. That's what we're talking about right now in season 2 with Elizabeth and with Philip. On the other one, the complete opposite of that.
Oh, no. They freaking hated each other.
That must have been the worst marriage ever. I mean, honestly. That's I think saying something, because the marriages on this show aren't exactly great from any vantage point. So that's something.
They're the only couple that lasted.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to count death as a reason for why a couple ends. I mean, because, yeah. So that is one of the questions that we keep coming back to, and what makes their dynamic so interesting. And so, on the road to get to that big confrontation, dealing with this still, comes into play. I don't recall. He's too unlikable of a person to remember his name, but Philip's friend, his main friend, his best friend, really, throughout the first these episodes here, this particular arc, we see his wife back home. Honestly, kind of amazingly, just decide, I'm done. I'm done. And she begins to seek divorce. And immediately, you get to see what a particular... Look, one of the great things about this show is, while not all of it is certainly true, while there are a lot of, it is fiction for the most part, but it is based off on truths. This is an example of getting to know the times that they were, and the fact that this woman is seeking permission to start the proceedings for divorce. Yeah. And she can only, there's a sequence where she goes, I think, to the ministry or whatever. I don't know if that was what that place was called. I'm just calling it that because that's a nice word.
The ministry.
Yeah, sure. The Ministry of Magic. The Ministry of Divorce. How about that? And she basically tells this person up front, no, fuck him. I'm out of here. And she's only going to be granted the ability to start doing that if she has evidence of one of three things. Which is, I don't even know if that was that strict in America at that time. They're talking about in the 1950s. Divorce isn't common per se, but it is beginning to be, because it's beginning to become allowed in many regions of the planet. That's for sure. And we've talked about at length in the first installment about how, the Church of England's values and lessons are so ingrained into the culture of Great Britain, obviously. And so the fact that this is even allowed, I think at the time, at that moment, could be considered a revolutionary thought. Although, of course, that falls apart entirely once you see the injustices done to other couples like Peter Townsend and Margaret. But in this example, she's basically given three big options to if you can prove one of these three, then we can start to going through the procedure of divorce.
That's nuts. I absolutely hate that. What? You're forcing people to stay together when clearly they're just toxic to each other. Mm-hmm. Why are you gonna let them stay unhappy? I don't know. I don't like that at all.
No. And she has,
I don't think that we had that here, but I want to say that it was more so. I could be wrong. Obviously, I wasn't born in the 50s or even alive at the 50s. In the 50s. But I think it was more so the guy would have to go and ask for a divorce. If a woman went, they wouldn't really go through with it. They would just think oh, she's crazy or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
So that might be worse because you're not even giving them a chance to have options of why, or I don't know. So I don't know which one's worse, but either way, both are really bad. If you guys don't want to, if one party doesn't want to stay together, then just don't stay together. Sorry.
Yeah. With this particular wife, she's handed to her. She's determined, and honestly, she's in the right completely. This bastard left her with her kids, and he never called her. He never did. Like, he basically abandoned the family, and so like it from that perspective, it was really unforgivable what he did. He really, even toward the last moments that we see him with, he has no remorse for it whatsoever. So, like, you know what? Fuck him. And good for her for tracking down the people that she needed to find this proof. And that's where things get really explosive, because what she's handed through a source of that particular gentleman's club that we mentioned earlier, that Philip and the friend were founding members of, was basically a fucking confession dial, if there ever was one, of like these, because I mean, it was written by this obvious, I'm calling, he's a pervert. That's what he is. He's this disgusting asshole pervert. I mean, that's pretty much his personality every moment that we see him with. So I'll go ahead and call him that. And so he writes this disgustingly, it's disgusting from an outlandish standpoint, because it is very, it's written to be very easily understood. Like, you can read between the innuendos about what he's talking. That's how like blatant it is. And it's also offensive from an intellectual standpoint. And Philip brings this up later on, like, how stupid are you? Why did you write that? And you sent it back for this to be read aloud? And also, it was hilarious, this gentleman's club, he needed to hire new security. The waitress just took the letter and just ran with it. And she gave it to the wife. And then that was submitted as evidence for the divorce proceedings. And then at that point, it stops, being less about her and that asshole and more about the implications about what this means for Elizabeth. Because, as I think Michael, the basically the chief of staff, as you will, of Buckingham Palace, I think he has a conversation with, is his name Charles or Tommy Lassell, whichever one of those two. They have a conversation about the papers will make not an unreasonable, which is the way he puts it, not an unreasonable connection to Prince Philip.
Prince Philip, yeah.
And at that point, I mean, that's a pretty accurate description. Not an unreasonable assumption to make. And that's when the fireworks really start going off.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just also, I don't know. Obviously, like, there is more to blame with Philip, but like, this guy clearly, like, is bad news.
Yeah,
you think that he beginning would know better.
Yeah. I mean, I guess at that point, if you want to take his position, you could, adjust expectations for the time period. Sure, I guess. Well, I'm not even sure if guys being considered a friendly scoundrel would be even a time exclusive thing. It seems to be a general rule all around. But I guess at that point, it was a much more allowed thing to do. I mean, I don't think anyone was ever okay with it. They just kind of shut up and let them do their business. I
would hope that they wouldn't be okay with it.
You never know. I mean,
that
look,
is true.
You never know. We have people today that are, psychotic and be unbelievably stupid, that have these huge microphones and they constantly, speak against their very own best interests. So, like, why would we think it was any different back then? I mean, look where we are right now in the state of things. Although I think this may be the last episode we record in Red Spotlight in the Donald Trump administration. So, yay.
You're right.
Maybe yay. So, like, that's the end of an era, kind of. So,
4 more days.
4 more days. Let's see if we survive the finale.
Oh my God.
I laugh, but I also, because I'm scared and nervous about shit. So there's that. So shall we get to the confrontation on the boat then?
Yes.
What do you make about all of that? I mean, I loved it. It was an amazing sequence. They finally had the chance to hash things out, and it may be the best scene of the season. It's one of the best scenes of the season, definitely for those two. And I don't know. It definitely. How do you think that whole conversation between them went? And in terms of what they decided to do about it, what did you make of that whole situation?
First of all, you're talking about the last thing, right?
On the boat. I'm talking about episode 3.
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about when he's coming back from the 5 months or however long he was out at sea. When he's coming back, and then she flies to meet him. And in Lisbon, I think.
She's terrified.
I know. She literally flew. She was like, not only did she call your ass back home, but she was like, I'm flying over to meet with you, okay?
I'm going to pick you up.
Yeah, that's how bad it was. Like a pissed off mom. Like, no, I'm gonna pick you up. We have some things to talk about here. So she flew over, and they're both on the boat, and they're having the most explosive conversation they've ever had on the show at that point. That's what I'm not referring to way at the end of the finale.
Okay. Okay.
It is funny the way you put it, though. Like, I'm picking you up.
I think that's how I saw it the first time, too. And I had the same reaction. I was like, oh my God. But, I mean, didn't they just, decide to sweep everything under the rug? Usual?
As usual, yes. I think they had it all out. They very loudly expressed how the other person feels, which is what we've already been discussing this entire recording. And ultimately, what Philip decides to settle for is, I want to make this work, but it needs... He basically has, a list of demands. Of course. And it's the same thing he has wanted from day one. Respect. He wants to command respect. And I think a little part of me does understand that, because we've seen throughout the entire show, granted, the royal family and the people that work there shit talk about anybody that's ever lived. I mean, that's just what they do. But there has existed this clear and evident disdain for Philip, even being in the family, because of his family's history and connection with the Nazis, which in retrospect, considering what we find out later in the season, seems a bit hypocritical.
Oh my God, yes. I remember. Oh my, yes. When that episode came on, I was like, excuse me? You guys are shitting on
him? These people are a bunch of hypocrites.
Granted, they shitted on his family for good reason.
Right.
Not taking away from that. But still, bro, I was like, are you kidding me? Wow.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that, that whole revelation business. But that's just something that occurred to me. It's like, yeah, that was, but Philip is right. He's just downright disrespected by everybody. And the fact that he was like, maybe he should go away. And they send him away for months on end. Was as evidence as you ever needed it to be. And of course, all of the things that happen in season 1, like it's absurd. And it's hilarious. Well, this is putting that hilarious comment to the side. It is sad. And I think understanding to a situation where like he feels so humiliated that he is ranked below his 8-year-old son, Charles.
Yeah.
Like he, not only is he like,
that comes, I have words. Because that also comes into play later on.
Oh, yes.
And that,
oh, yes. Uh-huh. And when he said that, I should have seen it coming, because really, this is the beginning of
his relationship with his son.
No, that's
very
not.
Interesting.
This is the beginning of how many, like, Charles, again, we haven't talked much about him because he doesn't really come into the show until the end of this season, then big in season 3 and 4. But like, a lot of things really, I excuse nothing he did, obviously, with any of these people. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of bad things that happen here with just about every person of the family. But one of the things that I'll kind of forever be sympathetic in Charles's corner for is the fact that he, for seemingly no fault of his own, was resented deeply by his parents for very different reasons at a very early age, just by fucking existing. And I find that kind of tragic. Really, like, I mean, for what he ended up being, you almost kind of understand, oh, of course, you can only ever be this kind of person because of what happened here. You've been resented practically your whole life, and it's like, that ain't a good look on the royal family. And it also brings into question why these people are the way that they are. And it's explored furthermore in seasons 3 and 4 with the dynamics of the family at play. But it's like, Christ, are there some... And again, Alexis and I are not parents. We don't have kids. But we belong to families. Extended families at that. And damn it, I don't think... Like, the way that... And please do not misunderstand this as an indictment or some kind of derogatory comment on the way that all British families raise their kids. But let me just say, in particular to how the royal family raises their kids, I find repugnant and offensive because they only continue to create problems for themselves by how mishandled a lot of the raising of their kids. Like you, for example, you never see them until the very end of the season. Like the kids are never around, and it occurs to you slowly, like, oh, the reason you never see them is because they're never there.
They really weren't there. Yeah,
they're always gone away with other people, basically nannies who are raising them, and it's like something about that is, I don't know, kind of unsettling to me. Like, this is and it's tradition at the time. Apparently, it's just the way you do things. But when we get to that point in the series,
then, like, I feel you would think that they would be more involved, seeing as you're raising people that are going to be the leaders of a country. I don't know. That just blows my mind.
With Elizabeth, look, I think we had a story in season 1 where she herself was very critical of her mother for the limited education that she received. And then here we have a situation with Charles and Anne, who are seemingly never anywhere to be seen. And they have a little bit especially Charles has an episode later on in the series, in this season in particular with Philip, which is what you were referencing, of course. And I have thoughts about that as well. But going back with Philip and with Elizabeth in this particular exchange, yes, he's also very much looked down by the mustaches, as he calls them. And really, the solution that they came up with was, on the face of it, kind of absurd, but then also at the same time kind of what needed to be done for him and for, you know, to get him to play along, because these people, we wouldn't call them people at this point, they are of and about the institution above everything else. And I guess the only real way to command respect without any kind of earnedness to it is to just give him a title. And they do that. And he becomes the Prince of the United Kingdom. And I don't know where that lies in the line of succession, but for the moment, he basically, again, the way that it came off when they were doing that, it was like, now he's not just a royal, but he's an extra royal. And I was like, okay, but wasn't he called Prince before? Was he called Prince before or no?
I don't think so.
He wasn't, because he was the Duke of Edinburgh. They kept calling him the Duke of Edinburgh, but they never called him
anything royal related.
And it's like, and one of the things that's also a little bit odd, although I guess it makes sense because of the, shouldn't he technically is a king, because he's married to the he's married to the Queen, and so technically he should be the king, but because the Queen is the mothership, basically, but I guess at the same time, like, okay, but why can't he just have the title king? But again, I guess with their culture, a king would supersede queen, and it's like, because when they have kings, like, you know, her father, King George, well, there was Queen Elizabeth, her mom. So like, what? Yeah, it's kind of bullshit, kings but like
are above queens, that's why.
Exactly. So yeah,
stupid.
So idiotic, really. But okay, fine. That's the Prince Philip, and they have this royal ceremony, and what I love is how everyone in attendance in that sequence, and it's not very long, but everyone in attendance is just like, this is so absurd. This is like stupid. But it kind of worked. Really, at the end of the day, from this point forward, he does command respect a lot more than he did beforehand. So, you know, and it didn't take that much from Elizabeth. You almost have to think to yourself, like, wow, if it was that easy to give him that title, why don't I just do it a long time ago at this point, you know?
Well, yeah, like, but you always have to come in between what your family wants.
Yeah. So I guess we can stick a pin in Elizabeth and Philip for now, because there's one more thing at the very end with those two. And I want you to lead this, because I suspect you are as passionate, if not more so, with Margaret and with Vanessa Kirby and the performance that she brings to that character. Let's get into Margaret and then Tony, I believe.
Tony, yeah. That's... This whole, like, her whole relationship or her whole arc, I mean, I feel like every arc she has every season just makes me so sad.
Stop right there. Stop right there.
Okay.
Everything that happens to her is sad. Everything. And you're so, I didn't even stop to think that, yeah, every single season, it's like, all right, How can we
third season? I mean,
God, but no, continue, please. You're so right about that.
But this season, I mean, I think for me the worst things that happen to her are in the third season. But this season, you know, it's kind of the lead up to that. And I don't know, it just, all she wanted was to marry that one guy. Like, that's literally all she wanted. And, you know, now that she finds this other guy, he's a piece of shit.
He's more than just a piece of shit. There's a lot of things with him. The sad thing is, I think this is probably the happiest we'll ever see her on this show in season 2.
But the episode where
Beryl.
they first meet,
Beryl.
and like,
that was one of my favorites.
They do the, oh my god, and where they have that photo shoot. I don't know if you looked up like the actual picture.
No.
Oh my god, love.
I haven't. No, I maybe I should have. But you mean the salacious one, right? That came out in the paper. I love that moment, by the way. No, look.
Yeah.
Talking about the episode Beryl, which is basically Tony's name for Margaret. Look, off the bat, there is something about Tony. Not even any words, just his demeanor and the look on his face. And their initial interaction at some other wedding, and then therefore thereafterward, you get the sense almost immediately about, okay, oh no, I see where this is going, and at first that might be good, but it may end up being even worse by the time this thing, you know, comes full circle, only because as you said last episode, Peter Townsend perhaps was the perfect person for her to really balance out, you know, Margaret's excess personality, if you want to call it that. And so what you have here in Tony is the antithesis of Peter Townsend. He has his own inflated ego. And if we thought Philip had ego, well, hello. I mean, Tony's got a lot of things going in his way that off the bat are concerning for us as viewers, because we know a lot sooner than Margaret a lot of these things that are what Tony does and are just not going to gel, you think, anyway. And maybe at first you think it is gonna work, but then there's a lot of overwhelmingness to the baggage that he has that really, you're always thinking at the back of your mind with these two, when is the rug gonna be like pulled out from under her? Because look, I believe, and they did a really great job of making us feel why these two were drawn to each other and were attracted and, you know, lusted after each other.
Because they're the same person.
Thank you.
And that's what they were attracted to. They're, you know, I don't know how to explain. Like, they love themselves, and so they see themselves in that other person, but they still love themselves, and that doesn't mesh well when they're together. And
because of that, it kind of seemed doomed from the beginning. No matter what we would see this season or next season. Two things. Tony is not at all like the kind of person that would conform to the institution, which, by the way, that was my initial concern, was like, how is this personality going to figure into this family, right?
Yes,
and then
that's what bothered me the most.
But the strangest thing happened where, and spoilers slightly for season 3, which we see that character come back, but they kind of love him. There are never any problems between the family and with Tony, ever, at all. That was the weirdest thing.
This is what was wild. Okay, I'm not saying this because I'm anti, LGBTQ.
Right.
Like, no.
Anti-kink?
We have to consider the times that they are living in. This was not okay. This was beyond not okay. What's his name? Tom?
Tony?
The guy? Tony, sorry.
Tom?
He was bi. Sorry. He was bi,
right.
Or was, I don't know if he's still alive. Was bi. And the family knew. Like, this was known information.
And they let...
But because the other guy was divorced... I don't understand.
Yeah, we're talking about what, the 60s, I think now we're in, or late 50s, early 60s. I don't think there was a single place in the world where if you belong to the LGBTQ community that you would be
welcomed with open arms.
Much less tolerated, really. As unfortunate and disgusting as it. Remember, this is, of course, the same country that chemically castrated Alan Turing, who quite almost single-handedly turned the tide of World War II with the invention of the computer and, cracking the code to decode Nazi transmissions. And because he had relations with men, he was sentenced to chemical castration, of which he, of course, committed suicide because of how horrible that was.
I would assume he would.
Yeah, so this is why this is, the era, and this is the country that we're living with, right? That we're talking about here. But it ain't just that, though. He is, I guess by modern terms, a man whore. I think that's fair to say. And he has frequent... So he frequents basically... He is a photographer, and he has many clients. And I think it's fair to assume he's basically been in bed with all of them.
Which, again, I want to make sure people understand. You do you.
Right.
You do you.
Yeah.
As long as you're not hurting anybody, go on, do whatever.
Right.
But this is just the times that they were living in, and it just blows my mind that was okay, but getting a divorce was not okay.
Okay, well, right. Well, thank you for pointing out that hypocrisy. But to me, if I came across as I was saying that was an issue, it was an issue because he kept doing these things while being in several committed relationships. So keep this in mind. This was a person who basically slept with every client while having two serious relationships. Two, in the fact that he was in a relationship with Princess Margaret, but he was also in a throuple.
Yeah.
He was in a throuple with a guy and a girl.
I mean,
and again,
respect.
The problem...
I can't even get one.
I will say, I part of me was like, fuck, man, I'm jealous. I mean, literally, part of it was like that. But at the same time, it's, again, this isn't judgment on any of these individual actions. The only judgment that comes into play is, did Margaret know all of this? That this was, I didn't get the impression she was aware, at least in the beginning, that all of these relationships were going on. I don't think so.
But did it, Somebody told her, though. Philip, I think, was the one that said it. When she first, like, was talking about him. I want to say Philip. I don't think that he told her, like, you know, oh, he's doing this and this. Mm-hmm. I think he told her, or he mentioned, like, oh, we, like, people, like, talk about him. But I don't think that she believed it.
Right.
So, I don't know. Because she was so, like, infatuated by him.
Right. And so that's all the things with Tony. And before we move off of him, it's like, it is pretty stunning how, you know, the family knew all those things, and yet I'm going to assume they just chose to do what they do best and look the other way. At least this is what I hope was the decision making, or what was behind their decision was like, well, we really can't, like, say no to...
Tell her no again.
Right, like, that may be a bridge too far even for us. So...
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that's what drove that decision.
Honestly, I hope that was the reason. Even though they should have said no. I do hope that they had some heart to be like, maybe we shouldn't deny her this again. Because, you know, it's so... It'll be bad.
Tony, man, and look, he is a charmer. But man, he must have been some charmer, because through all the hoops you have to jump through to join this family, which we see later on in a different generation of this. It's remarkable to me how he had a lot of baggage and yet never had a problem with any of the family. To a fault sometimes, and we'll get to that in season 3. But yeah, even the mom, like, loved him. It's like, damn. And and at the same time, and this is what's really hilarious too, because it kind of crystallizes in this, I think they were at Buckingham Palace and they were celebrating, I think, the engagement announcement. And they had, you know, Margaret's friends they were all partying. And there's this moment where Philip, it goes to him, he's there, and he is legitimately pissed off because he basically goes to Elizabeth, am I crazy here? Or like, what the fuck are you guys on? Like, I would never be allowed into the family with all of the things that I'm seeing here at this party. Like, I had to go through hell to be in this family. And that was hilarious to me, that moment where he was like, what the fuck, man? And it's true, because the family hated him. From, like, they may hate him less now, but they really hated him in the beginning. And then here they really do welcome Tony with open arms.
Wild.
That part gets me. Oh, and I should have mentioned also, one of the people in his throuple were knocked up with presumably what would be his child.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Nuts. This guy.
This family.
Yeah. But yeah, like, he is a shitty person though, because I feel like, again, you do you, but once you're in a relationship, like, why would he say yes to being... Whatever.
To what? To being married?
Upset. Yes! Like, if you want to keep having this lifestyle, then okay, find somebody that, you know, matches that. Don't find somebody who isn't okay with it, and then keep doing it anyways. Do you know how much damage that causes to a person, especially one that's already damaged? Like,
stay tuned for season 3. That's a great that's a great commercial for season 3. It seemed that the show was trying to say that the reason for why Tony, and you're right, like, he also is not the person that would willingly want to be a part of this institution or this family. But you almost get the sense that he did it because, yeah, he loves Margaret. I don't think he ever loved her enough to marry her, but I think he only entertained that because
money.
That's a big part of it. But they also bring in his mom. And I think one of the last scenes with them as they're about to get married, is like, you could tell he was a person that, you know, forever seeked the approval of his mom, and that family had a really complicated history, as seemingly every family does ever. And then as they're about to get off, you know, at Westminster Abbey for the actual ceremony, she says to him, I hope you didn't do all of this just to get my approval. Like, damn, what a cold bitch. But
Yeah.
true at the same time, why would you do all of this just to do that? Like, she's honestly not really worth it, if I'm being honest. But that's what he wanted, it seemed, most of all, and it seemed that he was willing to put up with the marriage. And, you know, in his credit, thereafter, the marriage, from appearances, he didn't seem all that unhappy until later on. So I don't know. But that's with Tony. Now with Margaret, you at every inch of the way with this relationship, at least my impression was that she was running to this. She wasn't jumping into this. She was running to this because she loved the idea of being married more than she loved him. And I think she did love him. Yeah. And I think she was probably conflating the two because of how burned she was.
I think he kind of, she saw him as kind of like a savior to her because of her past. And she was kind of like, okay, maybe I can care about somebody else type of thing. It just wasn't the right person.
And I also don't want to completely like discredit her. I'm sure she was, to an extent, aware of the person she was marrying. But I just think, really, she convinced herself that she couldn't wait any longer. This is the person. I've decided this is the person, and I'm not going to think about it anymore. I'm done waiting. I'm tired of waiting.
Yeah.
This is it, and I'm going to commit to this. And so she made it happen, regardless of what could have happened. But
I just feel so bad for
I know,
her.
but that at the end of the episode Beryl, which was their first introductory episode to this relationship, I don't know. I love that moment where, especially where we're in Buckingham Palace and the family finds the paper with, you know, the backless photo of her where she appears nude, apparently. I loved it. It felt like a big fuck you. Fuck you to like all of them.
It felt like every Disney Channel star after they no longer are with their contract.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. You're right. Which, fuck, Disney. What are you doing there? But yeah. So there's that. Good for her.
Yep.
There's more with them, but we'll have to see in season 3 where that's gonna go. Let's get into some other characters here, some minor ones, and then we'll get into because we always want to talk about the prime ministers, right? I think this season, more than the other seasons, has much less of an emphasis on the prime ministers. And I mean, they're in plural because there are 2 of them. Every other season, well, for the most part, there's one main prime minister that encapsulates the whole season. But with this case, where we have a leftover here with Anthony Eden, the prime minister who took over for Winston, last season. He is caught in this conflict with Egypt, with the Suez Canal. Honestly, it all is a bunch of bullshit. At the same time, his health is not good and getting worse because of it. And unfortunately, his tenure doesn't really last all that long. It honestly was over before it even really began. Sad to say for him. And he was kind of just forced out and was gone like that because he took the country to war, some would say illegally, and then of course the country wasn't okay with that, and so he was deeply unpopular. So that happens. And then he's replaced by Harold Macmillan, who isn't much of a personality. He seemed like the Queen seemed to enjoy his company, but he never came across as any, like, there was nothing really remarkable or noteworthy to him aside from the fact that he was in a marriage that for years, decades, the wife was seeing somebody else. But yeah, he really came across as kind of a weakling, especially toward the end where he was like, peace, I'm gone. I'm like at the worst moment too, because she was pregnant again and she told him, hey, I kind of need you to be here for me.
To stay,
And he was like, nah, I'm out and everything. So like, yeah, the Prime Ministers this season weren't really that, especially comparing it to like how big of a presence Winston was in season 1. There really isn't a comparison here.
Which I think that's what they were trying to say also. Like
their eras.
It took a moment for them to get back.
Yeah. It also is an interesting commentary on, the change of leadership. How do you follow a giant? And you don't want to do that because, I mean, from our examples here in American history, as flawed and inaccurate as it may be presented to at times, as it was to us, and incomplete too. Many presidents are not remembered at all because they fall.
I can't even name you like 10.
They follow. Like there's a whole bunch of presidents after Lincoln that nobody I think would.
I'll mention to like one.
Yeah, I mean we know the ones. I think from all the way from Kennedy going up, which we'll get to in a bit, actually. But all the way from Kennedy going up to right now, I think we know that because, well, this is our era. This is the modern era. So, like, we're alive, and there's footage and clips of them, and so many of these stories that we can just, like, so easily look up. So we remember those presidents. But, yeah, after Winston, the country really goes into I guess you could say downward trajectory, and in part of this, and we can also mention the episode Dear Mrs. Kennedy now, but part of this kind of feeds into what I was saying, and that is some of their territories are beginning to rebel. I mean, we talked about it with Egypt, where they basically took the Suez Canal, and they were supported by the Russians and everything. Well, this continues in, I think, Uganda, I think it was where the country is, where they're also thinking about leaving the kingdom and then heading over to Russia. And then, of course, got to remember the time. There's this geopolitical Cold War going on between the ideologies of communism and then, of course, Western civilization. So that plays into it with the introduction of Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy, in which a lot of really interesting political hands are being played. A lot of people are being played to like do a part unknowingly to a bigger design. But let's mention that because that is a big moment in this season.
I don't know. There's a lot of episodes in this season that I think are great. This is one of them. I love all of the stories that are told within this one episode. Obviously, you know, they make a big emphasis with Elizabeth and how she kind of sees herself and the insecurities that she has, and you know, she's getting older and all these things.
Yeah.
And then here comes Jackie Kennedy, who at the time was this, like, obviously she's iconic, you know, she's the president's wife and all that stuff, but she kind of became an icon within herself also.
Yeah. Yeah, she became her own star.
Yeah. So, you know, Elizabeth sees that and, you know, obviously feels insecure about it. And then seeing her, I think like one of my favorite scenes was when she shows up to
Buckingham Palace.
Yeah. And Philip is like, oh my God. Like, you know, and so
he's
being a creep.
I don't think we've ever seen him fangirl like that ever.
Yeah.
To anything. Like he wasn't the only one. Every guy in there was like running.
Everybody there was Yeah. So that was, I don't know. I like that part of the episode.
No, it was fun. Just it was hilarious watching them react that way. And then also you see Kennedy, Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy come in, and yeah, it's interesting because at first you just think that this episode, and it mainly is about, you know, Elizabeth's insecurities and her aging. Yeah. And then there's also some pretty interesting political stuff going on the side that you don't realize until it comes into full play at the very end of it too.
Yeah.
It's interesting how they present it, and I was actually really appreciative how the focus was on her, not on him. I'm talking about the Kennedys, because there's so much. There's so much already on Jack Kennedy. Not enough. I know that there was a movie called Jackie a few years ago with Natalie Portman. I haven't seen it.
That's a good movie.
Oh, okay. Then I hear it's good. Yeah. I just never saw it.
Yeah, and also I forgot to mention that she does take her in, like, and talks to her on the side, just both of them, and you know, they present Jackie as her being kind of like so nervous and so like she doesn't know what she's doing and like all these things. And Elizabeth is kind of like, oh, okay, so she's like a human being.
Right, yeah.
So that's interesting, and I like that.
Yeah, I mean, she is a huge star. I mean, the thought just came to mind, but she's basically the Marilyn Monroe of the political world. Like, she's that. And of course, like, before the...
Funny that you mentioned her.
Oh, okay, yeah, well... let's not get there yet. Before Jackie arrives, I'm already saying Jackie. It should be before the president and the first. Fuck them. Before Jackie and her husband arrived, she was credited by many of the, you know, headlining newspapers for playing an instrumental role in a political victory in America abroad of some kind. I don't remember what the specifics were, but she schmoozed the French or whatever. Which would ironically, I guess, be something that Margaret would come to do later on for next season, which interesting.
Yeah.
So I think she has a genuine moment with Elizabeth, and so that's why it becomes confusing later on when Margaret tells Elizabeth about all the shit that she was talking, you know, behind her back. And when we're watching this thing in real time, a lot of that felt false. Like that something, there's a disconnect here. How could she say these things, and yet we saw the interaction, the genuine connection that they made as people. Something isn't right here. And so that obviously it's terrible, because this is clearly feeding into Elizabeth's own insecurities. And what comes next is honestly maybe Elizabeth at her most unpredictable and most exciting. She seems to do that when she gets on her plane and I'm going here, and she gets on her plane and she flies off to to Uganda to meet with the person in charge there, which we mentioned earlier was, flirting with leaving and heading off to some other place. And when she's there, she realizes that she's being played and she may have made a mistake being there. But like, in a moment of sheer brilliance, she finds a way to turn things back to her side, through her own securities, just saying, fuck this, and gets up and dances with him, which we should say, the queen doesn't dance with anybody, at least from what I understand. So that in and of itself is like front page stuff. This is the 1960s, 1950s. Because, the leader of this nation or this territory is black. He's African American. Well, I shouldn't say African American. He's not American, but he's African. The fact that she danced with someone who was black in that time was a show-stopping moment for the whole world to see. The Queen of England, like, dancing. And remember, keep in mind, for those of you listening, keep in mind why that's a big deal. This is like at the same time that the civil rights movement in America was, getting up and going and heading toward them. This is the era of the civil rights movement. I mean, if we have Kennedy here, then we know what's happening with Kennedy's time. I mean, this is all that stuff is going on here. So this was hugely important for what she did. And she single-handedly, in that small moment, helped humanize basically black people all around the world, more so than they were doing and that wasn't even the point, but I think she accidentally did that. But the point of it is she put the spotlight back on her, and she so wowed them that she kept that territory on their side instead of them heading over to the Russians. And you're thinking like, wow, like, damn, this must have been like one of the biggest victories she's ever had as queen. Like, this is back against the wall, and she went for it, and she magically turned it all around. Because before that happened, it was going to be a miserable failure and really hurt her image even more. And then you realize, when we get back to the White House, really underhandedly, this is exactly what the Kennedys wanted to happen. At least how it's presented on the show, granted, but what is revealed is that Kennedy used Jackie to spur these insecurities in Elizabeth's age, for her to do this geographically or geopolitically, to keep that territory to stay in the Western ideology, Western democracy, instead of, joining communists.
Yeah. That's such a elaborate plan. I feel like they gave him too much credit.
They really did. Like that's because it almost didn't really work. It almost failed.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how much stock you put in it, but like it also, like everything in politics, is fucking shitty on so many levels. Like, and it also was not the most flattering portrayal. And you know what? I appreciated the unflattering portrayal of Kennedy, because he is so deified. He is so cherished. Honestly, Kennedy has become a fantasy in American politics and in our American culture, if you want to call it a culture, that we never ever get to see any of the flaws that the only flaw they ever bring up as far as the history that we're taught was, you know, Addison's disease, which is what he had. But
oh, I thought you were going to say Marilyn Monroe.
No, because they never bring that up as a flaw. I don't. Do they ever bring up Marilyn Monroe
as his flaw?
Do they ever bring up Marilyn Monroe or his like infidelities in the White House in history?
I was gonna say they never bring it up as his flaw.
Oh,
but they bring it up as her flaw because you know.
So as an American,
that's I think when I first saw that episode, that is something that I thought that I was like, oh, this is not good for them. Yeah. Like, that's really interesting.
I'm not used to
and
this.
I appreciate that.
I'm not used to seeing this person like treated as a person and not like a god.
You know, America.
Yeah, because it wasn't just, and to be clear, it's not just that. You know, the political. I mean, he was a brilliant politician, but that wasn't really the part where it was the worst. It was like how the when it got to the part of him resenting her and him lashing out at her for stealing the show, which is even more, honestly, kind of ironically immature than Philip was with Elizabeth stealing the limelight, because obviously the differences and the limitations of that institution. But with Kennedy, like, he uses his wife, as it's portrayed in this episode, to get the things to get the political victories he desires, and still blames her for being more popular than he is, and lashes out at her. So you get what you want, and you're angry at her too.
Yeah. Interesting. And we get, I'm barely realizing, we get a lot of that in this show. Because that happens in the future too. With another couple. Goddamn.
Yeah. Yeah, we really do here. But I really love, just one final thing on the Kennedy issue. What I thought was really funny was when she requested an audience with Elizabeth again. And I think it was at Windsor Castle. And what was hilarious was, so this was not at Buckingham Palace. This was at Windsor Castle. And Elizabeth, she's a bad bitch. Like, she had all of these theatrics set up to scare her. Like, she had, like, her guardsmen in full uniform, like, practicing, like, hunting and shooting. She had, like, literal armed guards in every inch of the hallway, and she had people marching in and out. It was like it was a circus what she had there. And I was laughing the entire time, like, damn, girl. Just to, like, you know, just sell a point, like, you thought you were gonna make fun of me, huh? Let's see how you walk out of this place alive. Because I was scared just watching that, like, well, shit. But yeah, that was one of the best episodes of the season, for sure. You know, if we didn't get salacious enough, I think it's time we mention Edward, former King Edward. That is his name, right? Is it King Edward?
I think so, yeah.
Let me just say at the top of...
Me at the end of the episode.
Let me just say at the top.
I honestly, like that last half of that episode, I wasn't even breathing until the end. And then that picture came up and I was like, oh my God.
I felt dirty watching this episode.
Yeah.
I felt, I don't know, implicated in this horrendous act only because I sympathize with this person in the first season. I felt so betrayed.
Us this whole year.
I was mad. I was mad at him. Like, damn, I felt something for you, and you.
That's the thing. I was mad the entire episode, throughout the episode, for various reasons, and they kept changing like every 10 seconds, and I just like didn't know how to feel by the end. That's why I couldn't breathe. But okay. Basically, they tell us the story of why former King Edward left and why they shunned him and exiled him.
The main reason. Because the reason before was like, it was Wallace Simpson, his mistress, and then he ended up becoming his wife. And that's how he played it for his needs. That was one of the reasons, but it really isn't, because every person in the first season hates him. They hate him. And you think that it's because of this, and it's part of it. But what you were saying...
It's like the iceberg from the Titanic, where you only see the little peak at the end. And then underneath it's just like this big old thing. Big old mountain. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. So they reveal the real reason for what constitutes the hatred. And, you know, you're so right when you said that I was angry all throughout the episode for various different reasons, and it kept changing as it went along. But because, the main premise of the episode is that, King Edward is in a rut and he wants a job of some sort. That seems to be like the reoccurring theme with anybody who's not the queen with this family. And we keep seeing that, and we will keep seeing that. But he basically gets his old friends together from, the homeland, and he wants a job. And so he wants to form a committee to find out what's available and to pressure the queen to give him something. And on the face of it, that is not unreasonable. That is like, okay, sure. Like, what's the big fucking deal? And the family reacts like, he wants a job? Fuck him. Fuck him. Yeah. No, fuck him. We don't want him here. And that sounds ridiculous, right? Because that's how it came off. Like, really? You're gonna go to such great lengths?
And but it's also a little bit understandable. You think that they're coming from a place where, no, he gave up the crown. He shouldn't have anything to do with it. He put us in this position now. But no.
The episode opens with a little bit of a mystery. We get a flashback to King George and Elizabeth, Queen Mother Elizabeth, and Winston. I think his only appearance this season. There's a box of mystery that we don't know about. And it's found years later here.
They even have Elizabeth go talk to him to give you more sympathy, and he, is practically begging her, hey, give me something to do. I want to help. I want
give
to
me
be
a second chance
family.
Here. Forgive me for this.
Yeah, and she, with reason, she's like, yeah, I should help him out. He's my uncle. And, we feel that way too. And so she goes back and she talks to her mom and, what's Tommy
Lascelles?
Is that his name? Uh-huh. No. She doesn't talk to him. She talks to his mom. The mom brings in
Of
Tommy.
course. Because she always does that.
Yes. And she talks to her because, she wants to help him out, and she's like, I think I'm gonna do it. I think, and I think she even talks to Philip, and Philip is like, no, bro, like, he shouldn't, he left. He gave it all up, and so Tommy Lascelles comes in for the big reveal.
One thing before we get to that, it's like,
okay, yeah.
One of the annoying things about this was that finding out that I guess Elizabeth did have a friendship of some sort with Billy Graham, the preacher, Billy Graham. But what I can appreciate though is her she really entertains and wants to give forgiveness because, and this is one of the fundamental aspects of Christianity, and all the denominations thereof, whether it be Catholicism or, what have you, but forgiveness. And ironically, for a lot of people who subscribe to this religion, that seems to be one of the things they never do.
Subscribe?
Well, yeah. I mean, they're a part of it. They belong to that ideology, that group of thought, that religious those values that are that are taught to them. But one of the inconsistencies that I find anyway with many of the people who belong, I mean, really with any religion, I don't want to single anyone out, but in general, and this is beyond that, but I just think in general people have this unwillingness to forgive anything, and that really. And that isn't to say that anything can be forgivable, which is what the central question of the episode is like, are there things that are unforgivable? Billy Graham was like, no, there really aren't. But that's his point of view. For many people, it's a very different question altogether. And whatever you fall on it, if you're listening, fine, you do you. But with Elizabeth, she really, 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 really tries here. And it's understandable, and she even feels bad about it, but she clearly is beyond disgusted with what comes to light that she can't find it in herself to forgive.
She doesn't even see him, I think.
I think she sees him one last time.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Because like, I think he is summoned to Buckingham Palace, and then she tells him face to face, I can't give you that. And then he's confused, like, wait, what? Why? Because he thought he was going to get it. And then she tells him about the revelations. And So, we've been dancing around it, I guess, a little bit. But what comes to light is this document that details an existing relationship, an existing relationship of communications, shall we say, between King Edward's Buckingham Palace, his reign, whatever you want to say, and Nazi High Command, which that means Hitler. And that after, which, I mean, in and of itself, that is a really, really bad look. But it's even worse when you find out that after he abdicates the throne, he and his wife go to Germany and they're treated like guests by the Nazis, and they're basically given a tour of everything and everything. And he was in a sense, co-conspiring to overthrow. Basically, what Edward was doing is, in the event that Hitler should win, that he would be reinstated as king.
Mm-hmm. But he also...
Yeah. Go ahead.
Was kind of planning to surrender England to
Nazis. Right.
Hitler.
That was... Yeah. And another thing is... he may have provided the Nazis with intelligence they needed to capture France.
That's a lot of bad altogether.
God. And so it really makes it increasingly hard for us as the audience to sympathize with him, who has now recently been outed to us as basically what amounts to a Nazi sympathizer, at best. You can say, and I think it's presented in the performance of the actor, Mr. Jennings, that he wasn't really a Nazi. He clearly seemed discomforted by what he saw in that trip to Germany. And you can say that he felt slighted by the fact that he had to give up his throne because he wanted to marry the woman he loved. And you can say that he really, after that point, do much of anything to help Hitler after that. But I mean, he did while he was in power, maybe not as much after he was in power. It's just really, oh God, it sucks. It sucks because this person obviously has no sense of meaning or purpose anymore in his life, and he just wants something. And after what comes to light, you really find it hard to just, I don't know, like the guy anymore and blame the family at all for how they've been treating him after all of that. It is despicable.
Yeah, and you are kind of watching all of this through Elizabeth's eyes, and at the end, you know, you could tell that she feels the way that we are feeling. It's just, I don't know. Seeing this, again, I mentioned it before, but I'm like a huge, like, history buff, especially with World War II. So when that all was being said, I was just like, are you fucking serious? Like, I Googled everything I could because I was like, no. Like, that's nuts. That's, like, England was so close to, like, losing.
Yeah, you're almost kind of stunned considering all that came to light that he was never prosecuted.
Yeah. He was just sent away.
And then it honestly, like, the goodwill that he had built up in the audience with, like, oh, he just wants a job. Suddenly it becomes offensive. Like, dude, you're off living in a palace in Paris, France.
I know.
And you don't think you got off easy enough?
And you have the balls to come back and ask for something? Excuse me? And also, like, yeah, how you were saying, you know, you can't say, you know, things may not be the way that they were presented to us, but it's a lot of things.
It's a lot of bad things.
a lot of bad things, and it can't be a coincidence. And they also make it seem like he has no kind of regrets about it.
He came off like one of those people that really downplayed his involvement.
Yeah.
That's a lot of bad. Yeah. So The Crown does that sometimes. They build a character up to tear him down. Before we get to Elizabeth and Philip to close the episode, shall we talk about well, there's two things, right? So we have, I think it was the 9th episode. So we have two main topics of discussion here. Philip's relationship with Charles, and then of course Philip's backstory being revealed. Mm-hmm. So which one do you want to tackle first?
I think his backstory first, because then I feel like
right.
it does
that shit was crazy.
Yeah.
That shit was crazy. Like, what the fuck? Like, holy crap. That explains a lot. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, fuck. Okay. Maybe you kind of got off easy considering what you were exposed to, because, I mean, we were told that two of his sisters were married to Nazis, I guess. But we never really see his family besides Uncle Dickie. I think we saw his mom at the wedding in the beginning of season 1, briefly. We don't see her again until the next season. And
that's a great episode.
I know. We'll get to that one. But you see, like, I mean, I don't even know how to describe that ordeal that he went through with. So his mom was locked away for what was presumed to be psychosis or her mentally breaking down. And mm-hmm. then, remind me, what was the situation with his father exactly? Because I know the sisters were around, but what was the father doing?
I think he was, like, with Hitler, wasn't he?
Probably then.
Well, not, like, with Hitler, but, like...
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
His family was very involved. Which is why we said earlier... we understand why they didn't like him, but the fact that they accepted him regardless. That's also why I would have loved to have seen, like, when they first met and, like, that story. Because it's just interesting what happens later on. Where they do kind of hint that, you know, they fought to, like, be together. They fought everybody else to be together, so I don't know. That's interesting.
It also isn't, like, what separates this from Edward, whereas, like, with Edward, he was the one, basically, who was doing the Nazi-ing, if you want to pull it that way.
Yeah.
But with Philip, like, it was everyone around him. Not everyone, a lot of people around him. Like, and it's really, what I always felt unfair was, like, oh, his sister was a Nazi. Like, was he? No one never mentions that. Like, he never really was that. He was a kid. You know, like,
yeah.
And so, like, that kept following him everywhere he went. You know? Yeah. That was a really crazy story, and also really sad. Because we saw that episode, and obviously, like, so I think it spurs with the fact that he sends Charles to a particular boarding school, which... before we even get to that, the concept of sending your kid away to a boarding... okay, all right. I guess that's done some other place that... I can't speak to it because I never experienced it, but that sounds interesting. Yeah. But they do that. it's an interesting episode because you show at the same place that Philip was basically raised in, and then he sends his son Charles, and you see the differences between the two immediately. It made me feel for Philip, the younger Philip especially. It was a pretty interesting commentary about, you know, I guess parents and parenting, and in the sense that you may just be in one of those statistics where you end up repeating the same mistakes as the parent, as when you become a parent to your children. It was just an interesting episode, and it also made me feel very, very sad for Charles, because and they establish it in this episode how basically the only meaningful relationship is with Uncle Dickie, Lord Mountbatten, who, and for all intents and purposes, that's his real father, because as we kept saying earlier on in the episode, Elizabeth and Philip are not only nowhere, like, we hardly ever see interactions until this episode, the 9th out of 10 episodes in season 2, when they're like together. But we also should mention that Elizabeth had more children this season. She had Andrew and she had Edward. And so, like, it just, I just felt really bad for Charles here, because he has a demeanor, a personality, and a spirit that does not gel with this family, and boy, will that forever plague him. It seems like, in this show that we're talking about, right? But off the bat, what Philip wants for Charles is the worst thing you could do to him, and you see it play out in the episode, and it ends up going about as wrong as anyone could have predicted.
Yeah. And that relationship he has with Uncle Dickie, that also plays out later on, and reveals that relationship to be another reason as to why Philip resents him so much as well.
There's a lot of resentment here. Too much resentment. Also, I will say, to her credit, Elizabeth, this is the most she ever cares for Charles in the whole series. I love how I said that to her credit, although it was kind of backhanded, because, you know, going forward, she's like... You know what's interesting, though, is earlier in this season, I thought it was an odd comment, only because we never saw the kids. But remember back in the first couple of episodes where it was one of the last scenes that Philip had with his friend, as, you know, he's basically saying goodbye to him after the whole scandal that happened. And he said to him, I don't like how Elizabeth acts with Charles, which is interesting because in the last season, when Charles is much younger, Elizabeth's mom points out to her he's too hard on him, and then we see that in this season, obviously years later. But the guy mentioned to Philip about how Elizabeth is always so cold with him, and she says because it's like seeing your own death in the face, because this is the person, her firstborn son,
that's gonna replace you.
And it makes me feel so bad for the kid, man. Like, both of your parents have, again, their own really fucked up reasons for really never liking you. And it's like, man, it kind of started from at a point where it's unreasonable to dislike a child like that. Yeah. What did you make of Philip then in this episode? Because he said he was making you upset. Did you say about what you had some thoughts about Philip and Charles?
It was with Uncle
Oh, that's
Dickie.
right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole conversation. But that's like later on. But I mean, regardless, like, I don't know. I just, that whole thing of like dads kind of being hard on their sons specifically because they want him to, or want them to be like this like macho guy. I don't know. That's always bothered me, and I don't like that. I just feel like that causes more damage.
It causes more problems than anything. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, the times, what more do you expect?
All right. I think we're about done. Shall we wrap it up with Elizabeth and with Philip and the Mystery Man, which they close out the season with the fact, I mean, damn, Philip, you really need to be more careful who you surround yourself with, man. Like, seriously. So, for a reasonable account, he visits, I guess, a chiropractor of some sort. He could have picked a better chiropractor, really. And then a year later, the chiropractor, Mr. Ward, is involved in a morality scandal of some sort. He had this club that was, I guess, salacious to a degree. And there's this mystery man that's pictured from the back that looks very much like Philip. And I think for obvious reasons, I think it is him. And I do believe they confirm that it is him. And then that once again brings back this issue with their marriage, and they have another explosion. And then this is where Elizabeth confronts him about that ballerina picture that she found out years and years ago. What are your thoughts on that moment?
This whole scene, I was crying. I felt for her. And then, because I remember at the time, granted, none of this happened to me, but I have been in a situation where, you know, someone cheated on me, but I never got to say anything. And so for her to be saying something to him and confronting him, even if it has been years, I was like, yes. And at the time when the season came out, it was still kind of fresh. So I was bawling. I was crying so much. But also I was just crying because I felt that she felt so empowered by her, like, confronting this with him. So yeah, I love this whole scene.
Yeah, I don't know what more I can add to that. It was a pretty powerful sequence, and kind of the last interaction we see between Claire Foy and Matt Smith as these characters. And it was a good one too. Which, yeah, that I guess we should talk about that, because this is where the cast exit the series, and you know, they end with this big picture of everyone gathered together. Yeah, and I don't know if you knew at the time when you saw this that they weren't going to come back for the next season.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Yeah.
Damn. That would bother me.
Yeah, when the following season started, I was like, wait, what happened? Did they replace her? Like, I thought she, like, got fired or something.
You didn't know before that they recast?
I didn't know. And I googled it, and I was like, oh, okay. I was very confused.
I'd be like, wait, what the fuck? What did I miss a season?
I thought it was like somebody else. Like I didn't know it was supposed to be her.
Yeah, well, thankfully I didn't have that experience, so there's that. Overall, look, I think we can go ahead and start closing it out. This was great. I can't say where this falls in I guess the ranking of the seasons, but I mean I love all of them, so I mean take that for what it's worth. I guess like the weak area with this season is the lack of a right, yeah, and that is part of the intrigue that goes on. But again, the particular political stuff isn't all that interesting as much, and what's definitely the focus is the drama with our main characters, which I think is better than season 1 and comes to a better conclusion, I feel, than season 1. So yeah, in fact, this conversation actually made me appreciate this season so much more, because a lot of things happen in every season and you almost kind of forget the details, but then looking back on them, like wait,
a lot of things happen.
Yeah. Just real quick to recap some, we mentioned Beryl and Dear Mrs. Kennedy and Lisbon. These are episodes I'm listing off. Vergenheit, which was the mic drop episode that we talked about with Edward and the Nazis. Another one that I actually really enjoyed was Marionettes, which was that person, Lord Aldrinbridge, whatever his name was. He was criticizing Elizabeth on TV, and then she got her to like open up. Yeah. That was a good one too. So overall, great season. Do you have any other episodes that stick out to you? No. Any last thoughts on the season overall?
I think this is my favorite season. It was great. I was really sad to see the cast leave the following one, but the next one is really good too, and a lot of shit goes down as well.
They almost seem to like up the ante every year with how much like
the next season has an episode that I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Another holy shit.
And then with the next episode we have a new cast to discuss, so strap yourselves in for that one. Thank you, Alexis, for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that all of you listening enjoyed it as well. Check out The Crown, streaming right now on Netflix, and we got 2 more installments with Season 3 and Season 4 to go. As a reminder, you can listen to our podcasts every single Sunday and sometimes on Thursdays when they drop. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Castbox.fm. We have episodes right now with the Mandalorian review. We have a Soul review, Wonder Woman. Don't forget the Fantasy Fair as well, which drops on Fridays, also has a review on Soul. And WandaVision, which has premiered and is a thing now on Disney Plus, is going to be recapped by myself and David Francisco, so we can't wait to get that started. We have so much more content heading your way, so keep it here under our spotlight. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.